Hi, guys. Have you ever met a guy that basically only plays video games? He's sleeping on his mom's couch and has no direction. Or maybe you've met a girl that is literally on all the dating apps. She is not showing gratitude. She is highly transactional, super flaky, and she doesn't even bother to think that maybe this is an actual human being on the other side of this interaction. Whatever this is, these are two examples of how us as a society are actually regressing and we're not adhering to our natural archetypes. But what's an archetype? An archetype is actually a core energy. It's been going on for centuries. It's very different than a stereotype, which we will get into. But an archetype is something that is a trait, a persona. Like physiologically speaking, men happen to be bigger than women. That's the natural framework. So over time, we've evolved to basically be providers, pursuers, protectors. I mean, in terms of men. And then as women, physiologically speaking, we're the ones that were giving birth. So what happens then as we've evolved through society, through time, women take on these roles of being the nurturer. They're intuitive, they're caregivers. But what happens when society is thinking something different and we're going in the opposite direction? In terms of these frameworks of the archetype, these are not rules. These are a blueprint. And what's happening now is that we're going in a direction where we're basically taking the things that make us human and becoming, in a different place. We're becoming a different kind of society. And so essentially today, our topic is the silent issue of how we are losing our purpose. So, hi guys, welcome to Alia & Co., the podcast where we talk about complex things and we make them simple by breaking them down. I am your host, Alia Kizelbash, and I am here with a pretty cool guest today, someone that has a lot of experience going into companies and building better leaders. There's a deficit when it comes to these leaders, this new generation of individuals that are coming in and they're lacking certain things. And so he is teaching these individuals by using these archetypes to be able to become better humans, better leaders, a better generation, basically. So welcome, Dhamitha. Very nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, anything that I'm forgetting, I feel like you do a lot more than that.
So Defonstic is my company. We're a consulting operation, and we basically work with external operations and governance. And in a nutshell, what that means is we help the ownership of the company, usually family offices or high net worth individuals, work with developing a framework that makes it exciting to work there, achieve their financial goals, and also make it creating some equity opportunities for their employees. And, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've been doing this for about 25 years, but the last 5 or 6 years, you've seen technology really advance, and a lot of people feel like, well, why do I want to build a company for somebody else? Let me go do it for myself. But as you pointed out, when you're not humanistic about how you interact with your employees, your vendors, it doesn't work well. It doesn't matter how great your company is. And we've seen companies that have had great ideas that haven't made it, and other companies that have really developed a cult following around themselves, and they've taken it to the next level. So part of what we started looking at was formation, fraternity, and family. And, you've all heard about work-life balance. Let's start with family. And it's important, right? But in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 decades, people say, it's not worth it for me to start a family right now. Let me make my money, and then I will go and create a family. So we started looking at our friends and our mates and even our classmates in school. Who should I hang out with? Who's going to help me advance? But all along the way, we've lost our humanity. So, and just to give you a little bit of background, how we kind of started. So my mom was a Montessori teacher. So we started looking at, early childhood development, what makes a leader, a person that is a good friend, a good family member, important. And we came on this idea of emotional regulation, which is fundamental. And what kind of backed us up on that was in Austria, about 4 or 5 years ago, we started looking at, they have a very advanced parental leave program where they want people to take between 20 to 36 weeks off, 36 months off, where they can actually spend time growing that child and really having 2 parents there. Now, it's interesting, in the U.S., we have people who aren't married but will have a child, and they'll cohabitate for a much shorter time than they cohabitate in Europe. It's actually kind of you don't have to be married, but it's kind of shunned that if you do have a child that you're not a part of that child's raising, right? So what happens is that those children, typically between 0 and 3, 0, 5, 0 and 7, they get this emotional regulation before they enter school. Well, now they know how to be a good friend, a good listener, all the skills that we would adore. But that's formed by having the family unit intact. When the family unit isn't intact and they're subject to daycare or other, parental, like a TV or an iPad, they're losing this. And now we're starting to see what you just described in your opening, where we've got a lot of people who are looking at people transactionally. Good example, Tinder. Oh, doesn't look good. We're not even looking past that person. And typically, most of our research will tell you is that you might see someone who you may not find attractive initially, but after you spend some time with them, you say, oh, well, this person's attractive, right? But if you're just looking at someone for 30 seconds, it doesn't make sense. Even in HR, now we're starting to see, optical character recognition will look at your resume within, I think, 6 to 8 seconds. So your whole body of life work accomplishment, you get about 6 seconds for something to determine if those keywords that you put on your LinkedIn profile or on your resume is going to get you 15 seconds for someone to say, okay, let's make an interview. It's really becoming a bad place for humans to work in, because you really have to make yourself, you have to find ways to distinguish yourself. And really what we've done now, we've been bombastic, and you're seeing things that are not normal, but it gets people's attention, what they call eyeballs. And that's what we've become.
Yeah, the rage bait, clickbait type of society that, doesn't actually make you look good, but it gets the attention. So it's kind of like an unusual prospect. I know that you use archetypes within the teachings that you are providing to these, or actually maybe, is it so much of a teachings or a program sort of thing? Are you isolating certain behaviors or perhaps just teaching certain behaviors in your program, or how does that work?
Well, so when we work with a company, what we try to meet them where they're at, and then we have behavioral scientists that we work with. So we'll try to start assessing people and looking at what their strengths and weaknesses are. And our job really isn't to work in the business; it's to work on the business and really help bring them. Now we can actually step in and do that job, but if we micromanage and make that person obsolete, they're not learning. And this goes back to formation. So it's not necessarily important that everybody goes to college, but it's important that you have formation. And formation, in my opinion, and the way I'm using it, is that you're able to take positive feedback, not critical, but positive feedback, so that you can say, you know what, if you want to do better at your job, you should probably be here on time. And being there late or just not preparing, this is why you're having these challenges. So we've all familiar with people that have troubles. They go through performance improvement plans and things like that. But really what is really needed today is that you need to be a better employee, which means, it's hobbies, it's friends, it's family, it's, learning. And if you just said, well, I graduated 4 years ago, today that might be obsolete, right? So a lot of that stuff is changing. So this is a part that the person has to have. And also in relationships, if you started dating someone in their 20s and you had a lot of things in common, but you, like you said, all you do is you play video games, you go out and drink. And by your 30s and 40s, now it's like, okay, I've seen this show before. I want to do more, right? So intellectual curiosity is a big piece. And in relationships, be it business or school or interpersonal, you need to have two people that are really bringing out the best version of each other. And that happens through intellectual curiosity. So you have to kind of work on yourself.
So what do you say that the human problems are outside of these leadership kind of oriented issues? Are there certain kind of triggers that you see within society that might be perpetuating a certain kind of persona when it comes to these guys, or even just our clicking society of just randomness of
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously in a lot of aspects there's been challenges with people kind of leaving religion, and religion to a certain extent is our first basic formation. Then there's some morality. Then there's philosophy. And those things aren't static, they're dynamic. You're using them in the real life, and it's etiquette, it's all these things, right? So as you start to really learn how, not to steal, how to be a good person, to tell the truth, all these things, it makes it easier. Now, what happens when those things are absent in your development, you start to look for reasons, wow, this isn't working. It's got to be this person's fault, or this person, or I'm a victim, or this situation is against me. So now this victim mentality keeps perpetuating. And so now you're becoming more angry, you're frustrated, and you're not looking at, things like humility or gratitude, or how do I, and that's the thing, we're not really training people to be empathetic. how do I fit into this person's, skin, and where are they coming from, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when we set up a company, we say, like, if right now we're in a situation where there's a lot of young talent that's hard to cultivate because of, the people are doing other things like, podcasts, and, they want to be Uber drivers or whatever, right? So when you're trying to develop this person, you have to say, okay, if I'm going to give this person, or if I want this person in my organization, what do they get long term? Is there any equity? Is there stock sharing? And, we've got great attorneys who work on East House, but we really feel this is more important because, when I was growing up, let's say, in the 1990s, right? Most people weren't like investing in their 15s and 16s, year olds in stock. Today they are. Mm-hmm. You've got Bitcoin, so kids are really looking at their financials. And so you have to really make your company a culture of growth, a culture of education, and also compassion, which means, yes, you know what, if your job ends, at 5, we shouldn't be calling you or emailing you or bothering you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's part of our governance, right? Because but that also means that you should be read in when you come in the next morning, meaning you should know your job. Your job just doesn't end, right? But it also doesn't mean the boss should be calling you and saying, hey, I got to have a meeting with you at 8:00 at night when you're trying to have dinner with your family. Right. And to your point is that a lot of people now, as we look at, organizations, people are abruptly quit because, so the biggest factor we're seeing is loneliness. Mm-hmm. So people are extremely lonely. They're very upset with how their life has turned out. They never thought they would be in these situations. And as they would say, the world would say, in the creative world, they're very successful. They have the car, they have the house, they have the 401k, it's all there, but they're missing all the fun things that make life, the friends, the family, the personal relationships. So when you're building this new society, what we call post-COVID, we look at formation, we look at fraternity, we look at family. Mm-hmm. And the reason we use those words is because if you don't have that, then you're not really living a human experience. You're kind of surviving, right, and you have money and you're eating, but what are you really enjoying? And like you said, all this clickbait that they're putting out there makes people look like they're having a wonderful life, but a lot of them are just scrolling by themselves. Right. You can't sit on a train and strike up a conversation with someone because people are got their headphones on.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. Like, I mean, I remember, I don't know, decades ago, you'd go to a bar. If you were sitting at the bar, that means you wanted to have a conversation. Now you're at the bar and everybody is sitting there on their phone. Nobody. Yeah. And to be honest, it's kind of weird if you're even sitting at a high top or anywhere, if you go to a restaurant and people think you're kind of like a psychopath if you're just sitting around just staring at things. I mean, what is our society? I mean, how do we get here? Like how do we get to a place? Do you think it's this digital revolution of, is that the reason why we're lonely? Is it like, what was the shift in your mind that we got here?
Well, and I think, like, one of the things that, we see today with kids, so it's almost like, so we see this in the medical field, we see this with kids, we see this with professionals. Everyone's highly specialized. We're not holistic. Mm-hmm. So, one of the first presidents of Harvard talked about the 5-foot, stack of knowledge, all these books that you would read and learn about different people's experiences. And it really cultivated this intellectual curiosity. Oh, tell me about yourself. Oh, you're from this place, and it wasn't like racist. If I asked you a question, you weren't offended, this and that, right? So we had this authenticity about us that we were like going through the world learning about it, right? And you saw this a lot in the GIs coming back from World War II. They came from farms, they came from small town America, but they were in Italy, they were drinking wine, they were doing all this, and so it really evolved them, and they had a zeal for life, and they were not afraid of taking a risk, which is really the American way. Mm-hmm. Today we live a very curated life. I have to start doing this coding at 12 mm-hmm. so I can be a master coder. But really, with AI, by the time you get to high school, what you thought you were going to do might be different, right? And the liberal arts, the humanistic parts will never change because we are until the machines take over, right? Because we are human. But the ability to interact with people. So when you get to, like, let's say mergers and acquisitions transactions or bigger deals, you have to deal with the owners, the lawyers, and find out, okay, what is it that you really want? Do you really need this number, or you just want to be able to get to your vacation and enjoy your life? So by having these humanistic conversations, you're able to get deals done better. You're able to, work with people. We don't work with people anymore. We have these curated things, and we're entitled. Well, I did all this. Oh, I expect to get paid this. And it's really failing us. And a lot of people aren't happy because even if they get the job they want, this, and I found this funny, like this a couple of years ago, there's people that are doing like two jobs, like they're working at two. And so what are we really doing? So I think the first thing is to kind of know yourself and then kind of figure out what makes you happy and then learn to be content with certain things. And I think when you're enjoying your life, you have the relationships that you want and you're getting, positive vibrations back, you're not so eager to keep, jumping and climbing. And the other thing is we kind of keep saying, well, and this is another problem is excess, right? So, I have a really nice designer bag, but there's another one that's like 60,000. Maybe I should buy that one because that's going to make me cooler. It doesn't. And what happens is that most people, especially ones that have a lot of wealth, and we've seen them, they don't really care because they could buy whatever they want whenever they want to. So they're actually the opposite. They've actually gone through all that gauntlet, but now it's really, they really enjoy having, and a lot of these guys will fly you to their, private, homes, and you're spending time with them. And that's really the biggest commodity now is time, anonymity, and the ability to, run your own schedule.
So that's a lot, right? Like, I mean, I think it's, where does the problem begin? Is it because we're distracted because of all of this digital and kind of society? Is it because of the fact that there's so much of an abundance of information that just the general masses are confused? Like, where are we starting here for someone to be able to get to a point where it's like, oh, well, now I'm not valuing these human interactions. I just am very confused, or I just feel as though this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm just a cog in this whole process.
Well, right. So again, if you don't have that formation, right, be it philosophy, religion,
with formation. So is that philosophy and religion? Is that the?
It's all of it, right? Okay. So formation doesn't have to be religion. It doesn't have to be, but there's more. So it's like so let's say there's like a pizza on the table, right? And there's 3 or 4 of us there. You've seen this before. People come there and they'll take 5 or 6 slices and stack their plate because they got to get theirs.
Yeah.
But then you can do the math and say, well, there's let me take 2 slices. So that's the ability to self-regulate and think of others, which takes a bit of compassion. And through philosophy, through morality, through religious experiences, you learn like, well, there's a better way to live. And then people are more enjoyable. So, it's too bad you weren't here, right? And when you make someone a plate, say, hey, I know you stepped away to make a call. I took care of you. People like that. I love one of the things I love is when you go to like a nice Italian dinner. It's everything's family style, and they say, "Hey, give me your plate," and they serve you, right? So now they make sure everyone eats. It's not like just grabbing food, right? And it starts there. It starts with little kids. How do you? So it's like you know your parents are working hard. Are you helping around the house? Well, no, I'm too busy. I got to study. I need to relax. Well, you're a kid. You don't need to relax. This is what you're supposed to do. So what's happened is that we've really abdicated that family tribalism where we kind of work together, and it's like well, I'm so busy I can't take care of my dog. I got to get a dog walker. Oh, I'm so busy, I'm making money, and I live by myself, but I need to have a maid. Really? So you have the inability to take care of things that you're possessing, that you want, right? But then now you translate that into your relationship, let's say, man or woman, and on your family. So now you can't take care, because you're so busy, being busy, you can't take care of anything. So this is where all these things stem from. So as you start as a little child, like how you take care of yourself, how you take care of your relationships, that allows you to gain that capacity to have more, and it's a richer life. Of course, you're going to have cars and houses and all those things, but those things become less important because it's really the time you spend with the people you want to spend time with.
Right. And that's a great point that you make. Definitely, it comes from the morality, understanding that there are other human beings that exist. Being mindful that etiquette, right? But etiquette and manners is typically taught to some degree. I think a person can, if they're pretty self-aware, can figure it out. But in terms of a society, like say, it is kind of chock full of this idea of programming. So anything that you're experiencing before the age of 3 is basically you're experiencing because of the environment that you're in. So it's your parents, right?
Yeah.
I would say that, this society is very different, and I'm not really sure where we're headed in terms of this generation and then the children that they're raising. But in a generation where there was less access, more time to reflect, it was a little bit more before. But the thing is that you still have to be somebody that is taught that, right? And if you're not, how would you do it? How would you?
Well, and that's the thing, right? So, for example, like, when you have, when you, as like, let's say a society, if we make parents, raise their kids in a prescribed time, like, well, you get, like, say 6 weeks of maternity, and then you can pick up your kid at 3 or 5 o'clock, and then from daycare, then you eat and go to bed. There's really not that much time to parent, right? But if you have more time, then it's okay. Now we're going to go over to grandma's house, and we're going to help her with this. So, and kids have that natural inclination to be helpful. So you keep fostering that, right? And then you teach them, okay, well, we're having this, tea party. Please go and serve your guests, right? So you teach them how to be of service, right? So they're not like just sitting down and eating and screaming that they haven't been fed. They realize that, oh, well, I have guests. Let me service them first before I feed myself, right?
But I will say though, that's a very cultural thing, because one thing that I would say, I think a lot of Eastern cultures are very hospitable, right? And so for them, it's like, someone comes into your house, you offer them something to drink, this and that. But then, maybe it's a cultural thing across different spaces. Like the German culture is very different. Like you go and I know in the Middle East, they will fight you to pay the bill, right? Like they will be, how dare you try to pay the bill?
I can speak. I've been to Polish and Serbian, and they're very hospitable, right? And I've learned the phrase like "nemam herbata" means like no tea for me, because they're always like having tea. You go to Serbia, the first thing they do, they bring out the rakia, they pour you a drink, and they want you to drink with them. So I don't think it's cultural. I think that we've lost that, and I think when people come to America, we've had to become kind of like rough, like, well, those things don't matter. Did you make the money, right? Did you bring this in, right? And my parents were immigrants, so when they first came here, people were very nice, and there was all sorts of people, white Caucasian people, and there was also bad people too that were not friendly, right? They were afraid of different, right? But that's not the norm. The norm is that people say, hey, how can I help you? Hey, you know what? I got this extra shovel. Let me give you one, right? So that brings up the concept of stewardship, right? So let's talk about that for a second. So one of the greatest things you can do is if you ever go to like an estate sale or you see someone who's passed away, like abruptly, and they have all these prized possessions, well, half of that stuff that they thought was important ends up in the garbage, right? People are taking whatever, and it doesn't really matter. So one of the things you have to always remember as a human is that nothing is forever. So your kids are going to be their own adults. You have to pass them along. Your employees will succeed you in running the company. So the way you treat them is the way they treat you. I always love this line from Charles Dickens. When Scrooge is kind of going back to his youth, they see this Christmas party and they say, oh, Fezziwig, he knew how to keep Christmas well, right? And something happened where from Fezziwig, which is his first boss, who had these great Christmas, like, oh, Scrooge, it's Christmas, turn off your, or put down your pen, your quill, let's go have fun, right? Scrooge was like, no, I'm going to, keep making money. I don't care about these things, right? So even back then, Dickens was kind of giving us this commentary on what happens when you cut this stuff, and that's the whole story of it, right? The Christmas Carol. And I think what happens is that, Austria really believes that they're in the parental thing. It's not the cost. We have to build good citizens. So to your question that you've been asking a few times, that how do we get here? It's because we've put material possessions above the community, the greatness, right? And that's what made America great. We're still one of the most generous nations. We've shown up for the big wars, right? But we also get involved in policies that are not humanistic. We cause a lot of dysfunction, right? And those things are not normal. And the reason a lot of people come to America is because we've been very open and generous, and we've been able to help elevate people from all different standards, right? And because those cultures, be it Arabic or Indian or Asian or Polish or German, they brought the best of them, and we can incorporate it. But because everyone gets sanitized into this, well, you're great, but you don't have this kind of car, this kind of house, so you must not be successful. That's the issue. What is success? What is wealth? Right? So, I'll throw this at for Defonseca. So one of the things that I was talking to a friend, and he said, well, you have a great Rolodex. I said, no, we have a big team. We put money in our partners' pockets, and we bring them in on all sorts of deals. So every deal is unique that we put together, but we have a vast cadre of attorneys, accountants, insurance people we'll put together to get them to success, right? But the reason we have that is because we care about making sure they get paid, that we develop the scope of work that makes sense for them, that fits what they do well, and then everyone benefits. That's what team means. Together, everyone achieves more. But we become like, well, so, we've gotten away from the win-win. We have the win-lose. And we have these book authors and these people, oh, well, this guy's great. Well, he just sold this guy's company and good for him. That's not the American way. And, as you look in your money, it says, in God we trust. So again, this goes back to that formation. So if you're thinking holistically, like, hey, it's nice to make money, but you have to do it in a fair way, then most of that spills over to your relationship. You go, you know what? I know you paid for this, and I didn't say, but I'm going to take care of you anyway. So there are people who do that, but when you constantly get people that are always trying to take more than they paid for, that becomes a problem. Like, you'll see restaurateurs will say, some guy goes, yeah, my omelet wasn't very good. I want that off my bill. Well, where is it? Well, I ate it because I had to eat. I was hungry. It wasn't very, right? So think about that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So where do you go with that? So the issue is, it's not wrong to say, hey, you know what? I don't like this. So I'm sending it back. But don't eat the whole thing, right? Don't wear a pair of shoes until there's a hole in it. Well, these shoes didn't fit well. Give me a new one, right? So I think, people, Nordstrom's has an amazing customer service. People have done really great policies to take care of their customers, but then people have taken advantage of it, right? So things like lifetime warranties and things have gone away because, and you see, even after COVID, the return policies changed. Like, it used to be like, if you bought it from us and it doesn't work out, we'll bring it back. Now it's like 14 days because people took advantage of it. So the question is, like, why do we become that way? And that's because something in our formation early on wasn't developed properly. So we felt like it's okay to take a little bit more from someone else. So instead of taking my 2 slices of pizza, I'll take 3 or 4 slices because, I got there first.
It sounds like a lot of common sense is necessary, but, there is that aspect of excess, and I think that it's a sliding scale. Not everybody does that. I think that there are still people that have a certain level of humanity in them, that they're respectful and conscientious of individuals. I'm happy that I have good people, and then I've met some pretty takers, like the takers, right? The people that take, they don't give, and it becomes like this unusual sort of space, but. So these are some interesting points. I think that the general crux of what I'd like to get into specifically, because I know that, with the research that you've done and the archetypes.
Let me say one thing to that point. Okay. So, on takers, right? So we've all experienced takers. So, one of the things that we do in our society is like, well, I'm going to say I'm sorry and it's all good. I said I was sorry. That's not enough. So again, going back to catechesis, when you get forgiven, say, okay, I did something wrong, but let me make it up to you. We forgot that piece. So in catechesis, we talk about reparation. And there's another thing called expiation we won't get into. But what that means is, like, you know what? I caused you a loss, or I was late. Let me make it up to you. I'm gonna do this for you. We don't do that, right? So, oh well, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't pay you what you're supposed to get paid, and it cost you to use your credit cards, and you pay more money. Tell you what, it was my fault. I didn't pay you properly. Let me pay this. So this is where, people have to do better. So there's a thing in tort law, right? If I borrow your shovel, right, and I bring it back to you, right, I should have it clean and I should sharpen it, bring it back to you. That's the right way to return that shovel.
Right.
Bringing it back dulled, beat up, and dirty, I return the shovel, but that's not the quality, right? And this is kind of it's a nuance. But this is what we teach kids, like, put your toys away, clean things. And that's the thing, like, if you take care of your things and then you'll take care of other people's things. We belong to some really nice clubs. There's people, a beautiful club, I just came from the university club. People will put their feet on the furniture, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Why would you do this at your own house? So this is how did that happen, right? That's because someone, their parent or whoever raised them, didn't raise them properly. And what happens is, and this is painful for that person, because the people that know better, there's already a strike against that person.
Yeah.
I don't want that person on my boat or my car, in my house. No, because you see how they behave.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think I want to move a step further after. I mean, we've been talking about just the origins of what it is and what the the negative kind of aura that it brings within our society. But let's break it down to, because again, we're talking about archetypes. That's a big focus in your process. It's not so much that it's linked to masculinity or femininity. I mean, it so happens that certain archetypes happen to be the blueprint, like, as I mentioned, when it comes to physiology and how they got there in terms of what they are, where men, the pursuers and the providers and being assertive and decisive, where women intuitive, emotional intelligence, etc. I do believe, though, and I'm sure that you agree, that we as humans need both, right? We can't just be one or the other. It just so happens the way that we've evolved, right? But there are, I know that, in terms of gender and pronouns and identity, that's a different topic. But I would say that we need to adhere to something, right? We're going in an opposite direction where now none of those, that blueprint, none of that is something that we are even considering, right? And so as a man, let's break down where men are at right now, and then we're going to break down where women are at. What are the issues that are happening with men right now in terms of our society, and where you're seeing specifically in leadership, but also kind of like that's like a microcosm of like our entire society, where we're headed, because that is being reinforced by what is going on at a larger scale. So I would love for you to break down what the F is wrong with these guys. What's going on?
Well, and I don't want to make this into like a citation situation, but there's guys like Scott Galloway, Richard Reeves, and they talk about the failure with boys and men, right? Mm-hmm. And a new book just came out recently called Two-Parent Privilege, and they were just saying that kids from a single-parent home tend to perform worse, and it's harder for that one parent, right? But then they actually get into trouble earlier, right? So a lot of this stuff there's a lot of work in parenting, making the kids pick up their clothes, things that are not normal that you would, right? So when you don't have that other person, prodding those kids, they just kind of fall into it, right? So let's focus on boys. So there's a great study that talked about how in an all-girls school, women perform better because they're not worried about impressing the boys. And then there's a different way to teach boys. Then there's a different, and that's why Citadel, West Point used to not be, they were not co-ed, right? Mm-hmm. Because that is part of our ability. And you could like kind of call out a boy and kind of and they would react. But for a girl or a woman, it might be a different way to coach them, right? Mm-hmm. So we as leaders have to be sensitive to that and make that work. But I think going back to men, a lot of so they were saying there's more women fighter pilots than there are male kindergarten teachers. So we have no more male role models really in schools that are and then the ones that are in there, they're like, well, it's okay to do whatever you want. And we've had this this whole woke episode that's kind of flushed through, where kids could be furries if you want to be a dog or a cat. I mean, what is this, right? It doesn't make any sense. So we've really lost that. And when you go back to things like Sparta, back in the Spartan society, they would have a boy of 8 or 9, they had to live on their own, do certain things, and then they would get accepted back in. So one of the things is, we need to bring boys back into situations where they can not just, because they have a lot of, energy, not just sit in a class, but to be able to play sports and work on like auto mechanics or woodworking and really become physical in a lot of ways.
Because they're not, you said?
They're not, a lot of them are not, because they don't. So, in the old days, like let's say when I was like, I'm not going to say old, but like say 20, 30 years ago, okay, let's just say it this way. If you ask, let's say, 10 kids that are 10 young men between, let's say, 25 and 30, how many of them have their own toolbox? Probably 30%. Maybe they don't even have a screwdriver. True, right? Because they wait for the Allen wrench that comes with their IKEA. But in the old days, you used to get tools from your dad or your grandpa, and you were kind of handy. And there's still guys that are handy, right? But the point is that those skills are kind of passed on. So most of your men were like their grandpa or someone else. So we lost some of this intergenerational learning, and that's why it was easier to have the iPad parents. So I went into video games, and we felt kind of fell on that. And there's a lot of guys that say, well, it's okay if I get manicures and pet, but no, I've never had anyone say, well, hey, your hands need it, and yes, they probably say.
I don't think there's anything wrong with a man getting a pedicure.
Well, there's nothing wrong with it, but the problem is also there should be
But don't be hyper into yourself.
Well, effeminacy is kind of a big problem, right? So the other issue is, like you said, and it's not easy sometimes to change a tire, right? Because the lug nuts get compressed, whatever. But a man should be able to change the tire, right? But if they can't do any of those things, or you turn a screwdriver, there's a bit of a problem.
Right.
And then so that means, like, how do you manage a home? How do you take care of certain things? Now you're always having to earn money, and then everyone has to make more to pay for other people to do it. Where if you look at like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, people were more resilient. They grew gardens. And men and women kind of shared those tasks. Now, some might be more domestic and some might be more outside, but there was that happening. And those weren't utopic times. There was a lot of alcoholism and bad stuff there, too. But what we're saying today is that we need to bring that formation and also that fraternity to help these young men. I'm a sailor, so we do a lot of sailing. And people go, oh, my God, sailing is so hard, and it's not. It's a 1% sport. It's the top 1%. But no one teaches it so a lot of people just get a powerboat because they want to enjoy the water, but they don't know the basics of sailing, right? And coming out of World War II, there was a lot of sailors coming out of the Navy, so grandparents and people would teach kids how to sail. And, even recently, I was, about like 10 years ago, I was on a train, and there's a program in one of the upper North Shores. There wasn't enough coaches that coach baseball. So that, we have to put our kids in another suburb so people used to make time to coach. They used to and there's still that happening, but this is so it's not necessarily the kids' fault because what their options, because now everything's expensive. You could learn how to sail for free back in the day. Now you got to pay $600 a week to go to a sailing course. And it's very difficult especially now when you look at schools too, they're cutting a lot of programs. So a lot of these kids don't have music or art or other ways to get involved. In high schools you used to have vocational training. Even if you didn't want to be in a vocation, you had to take, auto class or woodworking or do something. So you got familiar with a little bit with certain tools. Today that's not, I'm just going to be a coder.
Right. But then also, we were having this conversation before, is that how Hollywood is sexualizing men with rounded shoulders, the ones that look super frail. Is that something that you think is?
Oh yeah, you see it now more and more. In probably in the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of this stuff is kind of focused on girl power. You have these effeminate, men as with these women, so they don't look like they're capable, right? Jordan Peterson said, this is a great quote. It said, a weak man isn't a good man. A dangerous man, a person that can hurt you, that chooses not to, is a good person, right? Because if you have no capability or capacity to hurt somebody, you're not good or bad. You're incapable. But if you're capable but you choose not to, different, right? And I was watching this movie with I think it's Gal Gadot, and it had Rock and Ryan Reynolds, and she was some kind of spy or something, and then she starts beating up the Rock, right? And I'm thinking, come on, physics doesn't even work, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is how exaggerated our society has got. And there's definitely tough women. Some of the one of my great patron saints is Joan of Arc, and real, right? She's a real person. So there's definitely women that have been amazing in battle going back, thousands of years. However, that's not necessarily their calling. And when we keep trying to, downgrade men and kind of make it equal, not necessarily. Doesn't mean women can't be fighter pilots. Doesn't mean they can't be in combat. But there's, like you said, there's a physicality, right? And part of, what we talk about, amongst ourselves too, is that, look, soft times create soft people. There's a book called The Fourth Turning that talks about this, right? And, when you look back to things like World War II or these things, there's guys they were freezing, they didn't get, they had to survive, right? And those were tough times. We haven't had those kind of times in a long time, right? And a lot of these guys, if you ask them to build something or do something, they couldn't.
Yeah. There's definitely a shift in maybe the expectations decades ago and now. And I think that the level of change has been extreme. It's been a very, very, very large change. And would you attribute it then to this digital society and just the reinforcement of the digital society?
Well, I think it goes back to a couple of things, right? So, when people, let's just speak to, let's say heterosexual man and woman, right? So when a man and woman kind of came together, again, let's say your grandparents or whatever, and the guy was like, look, man, I don't have a lot of money, but I love you, and I'm going to get married. Okay. And they would build a life together. Right. And they would, there's tough times. They didn't make a paycheck. You got a job, you got laid off, whatever, but they kind of grounded out. Right. Today, there's people like, I didn't sign up for this. I want these things. This is not working. I need to, go this direction, right? So there's a lot of pressure. I mean, and now with a lot of women in the job force, those jobs are now less, right? So now, so one of the areas we focus on is there's a lot of trades jobs that are available that could make six figures, but those guys have to, go and do those courses.
Right.
The other problem there is that those jobs they're not, jobs for, they're not ditch diggers. They require math and physics and science. So being a plumber, being an electrician, these are high skill jobs, right? And now when you talk about solar panels or wind farms or, any of the construction stuff that we're doing, just even like digging a ditch, there's a thing of elevation, pitch. That's how water runs off. If you don't do that right, you're going to have water stagnate. So there's learning that. So that's why, having these kids have this regulation early on allows them to stay in school. When they don't do well in school and they drop out, now we have this issue. And that's why a lot of these young, especially in countries that don't do a good job keeping these kids in school, they turn into, gangs or criminality. And that's really where you have a lot of these problems.
Yeah. And going back to COVID, I mean, if you think about all the looting and all of the things that were happening, do you think that maybe there might be some link between these certain situations as you're seeing it?
Well, I think there's always bad behavior, right? We saw, I think there's always bad actors when society kind of like stumbles or falls, they take advantage, right? It's interesting, I'm Sri Lankan, so in my own country, Sri Lanka, when they ousted their prime minister, they took over the presidential palace. No weapons, just en masse. And they they ate his food, they went swimming in his pool, but there was no destruction, right? So there was no necessarily, people weren't like stealing, stuff, right? So, so this goes back to what's your operating system? Are you moralistically, or are you going to take something that doesn't belong to you and justify it, right? Or like, what? That's not right. I'm not going to do it, even if I'm poor. So we've now equated poverty with criminality. It's not true. There's people that were honest that just don't have money, but they're honest people, right? Yeah. So we forgot that piece. But going back to what you're saying is that I think that, it's very important that we really create two genders, both male and female, and give them homage to both. What's great about them, right? Women are sensual. They like nice things, and they should have those things. There's no reason they should try to be boys. And yes, if you want to get a pedicure or manicure, whatever, that's fine. But you should also be able to be responsible, provide, deal with the hard issues, right? And also, when we talk about fraternity, it's important that you know how to be a friend and show up, right? Someone goes, hey, I need someone to help move. Oh, good example to see how many friends you have. Tell them that you have to move. Half the people are like, oh, I can't make it, whatever. Even your family members, right? Yeah. So and that's the other thing. We're seeing this even in families. We always have this the family member who doesn't show up, who's like, well, not really my problem. I mean, yeah, mom's getting too old, so put her in the nursing home. So this is kind of where our society is headed. And to your point is that, we have to understand that there's a stewardship. So the way we treat others is the way that they'll treat us. So we have to try to, embrace the best qualities that we have.
What about in instances where you have people that, sounds selfless, right? In the sense that we're being mindful of other people's feelings. But do you think that can go to an extreme too, where you maybe get walked all over because you are then doing these things? In some ways, I think people are trying to protect themselves. Perhaps maybe the evolution of relationships. We're talking about guys. I would love to get into girls, but just the aspects of dating, right? Maybe somebody's putting themselves out there. They don't see the reciprocation. And then now, they put so much on the table and they're not getting it back, what happens in those instances?
Really, any relationship, right? You can say, look, I really like who you are. I love who you are. I just don't like that you do these things, right? And then part of your agency as a human is to kind of, stand up for yourself and put boundaries and say, look, if I show up for a meeting for dinner and I show up and you're 15 minutes late, that means you're telling me your time is more important, right? So you either should have called me earlier or rescheduled. So now I have to say, is this the kind of person I want in my orbit, right? And, and I can speak to my own things, like, we're very strict, but I don't have those problems. Right? I had a bunch of meetings before I came here, and everybody's on time, and we talk, right? So being busy isn't the issue; it's being respectful, right? So it goes back to the pizza. So if I'm not going to be respectful of like making sure you have, and that's why you have to discern like are those people. So ultimately, the relationships can go 70, 30, 60, 40, but you like them to be 50, 50. They're not always going to be that way, but if you're able to speak to that person and then that person can say, you know what, and it's the thing, I'm sorry, I'm going to make it up to you. And you know what, maybe we'll do it differently. Instead of meeting at 5, we'll meet at 7, or we'll do it on these days. Yeah. There's ways to have those conversations, but the problem is when you, like you said, if you allow people to keep taking advantage of you, then they really don't respect you. They really don't care about you. And that is, that self-deprecating behavior isn't positive for anybody, male or female.
Right. And should those people be in your orbit to begin with?
Correct.
I mean, and that's the thing is, though, something that I've been noticing is that, I mean, at least from on the woman front, is that, there are a lot of girls. I mean, like, case in point, I was asked for someone, mentorship, right? And woman in her 20s, beautiful woman in her 20s. She asked me, and I was like, okay, sure, and I have a busy schedule, so put it on the calendar. And I showed up, or at least that morning I messaged, didn't get a message back. And I'm like, okay, this is one of those scenarios again, because I've experienced this a few times. And it was just the flakiness, right? It's like, so then she begs, that, oh, no, I'm sorry. 2 days later, I'm sorry, I didn't, because she was accountable to somebody else. That's the only reason she messaged me back. Again, okay, all right, fine, let's just do a Zoom. Doesn't show up for that either. And it's like, what? How many times am I going to do this where it's like, I'm going to let someone walk all over me? The thing is that how can you depend on somebody, if you've been burned or if that, and I notice this in the youth so much more. And maybe even the youth that I would say is in these kind of professional spheres, the ones that are actually killing it and doing really well. I don't get that from them. I get it from those individuals that probably maybe don't have that nurturing, right? Where, hey, listen, be accountable to other people. If you're accountable, maybe if you put that out there first, they will also be that for you, And I think that maybe it's like, it's just being vulnerable a little bit to be able to, but I think that they're so tainted by this continuous loop of people that are just flaky and, non-committal, and, it just continues to reinforce itself with the apps and, this exchange of the transactional exchanges. It's so embedded in their society that they don't even know the first step to get to accountability or even being authentic. I mean, is that something that you're seeing?
Well, there's a great article that I think it was in the Chicago Tribune about, I think it was written in 1938, and it talked about, this generation is like lazy, they don't care about politics, they don't do this and this and this. And it kind of went out, and then it said, well, and that was written in 38, but then that was talking about the greatest generation who fought World War II, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, I don't think it's really a generational thing. I think we have to look back on ourselves, right? As leaders, as parents, as people. So to your point, it's like, and this is what I would tell anybody in a certain, if that happens, it's like you had one chance, it's over. It's gone. That's it. Right. I'm not going to, because, now if they beg and plead, whatever. Now, the other piece to this is that, I was watching this professor, and he was talking about how, like, there's like this thing, like 90% of all these papers now are being generated by AI, and this, a person submitted something on AI, and he ran through the filter, it got caught, he called her out, and got kicked out of the class, and she wrote the email apology very nicely, but it was also done by AI, right? So those are tools that are available to them, and that's what they know because they don't know anything else, right? So really, this is a failure of the generation that came before because we were too busy making money. The iPad, all the other stuff kind of took in. So that's what they learned to do, right? To do it this way. And I think I'm not saying it's right, but I also think that when you're called on, you're shown a better way. Some people, not everyone, will rise to that occasion, right? And the what we do now in our hiring, we have what's called an audition, 90 days. So you don't get hired, you get to audition, and you get to see how you work.
Right.
And it's also like how you show up. Are you prepared? What's the quality of the work, right? How do you interact with others? So as you lose jobs and you start to realize, oh, this isn't working, I'm sure they'll come along. But going back to your point is that I think the digital just kind of makes it easier. It's just like the same thing. It's like, hey, 20 years ago, you couldn't just text someone and say, hey, I don't want to see you. Now they just kind of ghost, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
But see, as much as you think it's easy, it's not, because it's better to have the hard conversation with someone and say, you know what? Oh, yeah, I don't really like you because you do this, you do this, right? And not that you're judging someone, but it's okay to say those things because they say, well, I didn't realize, and maybe that came from previous behaviors that were okay. Now you're expecting something different, right? It's not okay to not return my call, right?
Yeah.
And, I have even members of my own family, that are under 25. You'll text them and like 3 or 4 days later, I go, what's going on? I say, you know what? I say, well, I don't have time now because you know what? And it's hurtful, but I would say this for anyone is that you need to set those boundaries where if someone doesn't respect you, doesn't matter if it's your children or your, family, or you say, you know what? No, the answer is no. Because guarantee you there's other people who will be respectful, and as you fill your orbit with those kind of people, you'll be much happier because you don't have to worry about, are they going to show up?
Yeah.
Oh, here we go again. This guy's not showing up, or this gal's not. I've got this gal pal who's having this meltdown, and I'm switching my schedule to make time, and then they blow me off.
Oh, yeah.
You got to cut them out.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is, though, I agree with you. I think that once you start to fill your circle with more people with integrity, you only see that, which is nice but you have to know to set that boundary to begin with. And I think that perhaps maybe just because, and maybe I see it because I have kids that are in college and, and I'm hearing all of these things that, what these kids are going through because their version of what society is very different from the society that we kind of had access to. And so it does kind of reinforce itself. But at the end of the day, maybe in high school, we were also pretty underdeveloped, and not accountable to, it's like if somebody was waiting for you as an adult, waiting for you to show up somewhere. And then you're like, oh, I forgot, and then just didn't even like, oh my God, I'm going to get in so much trouble if I respond. So let's just not even respond, and then they chase you up and then they're angry and you're running off. Obviously I'm speaking from some sort of experience, but I do remember. But that does change because to some degree you do have to have those experiences where maybe you had an opportunity and now it's not there anymore because you screwed up.
Yeah.
And you have to have some failures to be able to recognize. And I think that, for me now, everything is tightened up where it's like I know the value of people's time. I want my time to be respected. So, every one-off, you think about it in terms of youth and you're like, yeah, they are young, but I think it's just also getting later and later. It seems like these people, like you're 30 years old and living with your mom, and that's totally fine. In a lot of cultures they do that, and it's a protection, and they're still earning and whatnot. But if you're playing video games all day and you don't have a job, I don't know about that.
It goes back to things like this, right? So let's say you had a paper route and you have to go collect money. In the old days, you had to go knock on the door, collect the money, right? Or you're a waiter in high school or college and you're waiting tables and you do everything right, you don't get a tip, but you still say, well, I can't, you can't just be rude or whatever, right? So what happens is as you go through life, as those young people, you learn these things. We've kind of abdicated, well, my kid needs to study in school, so I'm not going to make them work. I'm not going to, this was unfair. Let me write to this professor and give them a better grade, right? Well, those things, those instances really isn't about getting the grade or getting the tip. It's about those life experiences of how you're going to perceive those and navigate that, right? And that's what's going to make you successful in life. And we've got this idea that the world is fair. Someone's being unfair to me because I don't look the right way. I'm not this guy. Well, and that's going to happen, right? But then there's other things that people will give you, because you look a certain way or you are a certain person, right? So one of the things that we have to do is we have to stop protecting people from getting their hands and their fingers burnt, right? So if they go out there and they lose their job, well, that's what you get.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to pay your rent, and you may have to move home, or you may have to go work at Starbucks, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I can't, right? And there's so many people that are always looking for their parents, and it really is their parents' fault because at the end of the day, you can't the hard landing has to happen, right? And that's really what we've and that's because. And I go back to excess because we have the extra money. When we didn't have the money, back in the old days, people said, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you. But now parents have money, they can help. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you should, right? It says, well, you need to learn your lesson. Now, there's a time and a place to help. I'm not saying don't, but if a kid's like, hey, I lost my job because I was, well, then you learn a lesson, right? And a lot of people will become better. But like what we're seeing as you talked about our society is that there's a lot of people who have gotten by and we're lowering the bar. We keep lowering the bar, right? And this is kind of, so it kind of goes on to this is that there's people that are not, we have some construction operations, and there's people that are not qualified to be in construction. There's nothing they can do about it. They just don't have it in them, right? Because they're not interested in the work. It's not easy work. But there are people who love it. It's hard work, but they feel satisfied they do it. But you can't create a role for those people. Say, it's and now with technology, I can make certain things obsolete. I don't need necessarily this person, right? And part of what I do in our companies is we elevate that worker person to make more money because they can leverage technology, and we teach them because I don't need that middle manager. So what you're probably going to see in the next 20 years is a flattening of hierarchical organizations. That's why I said early on that we look at things that there's like equity, profit sharing, ESOPs, because those are more fair. And that's what team really means. Google has this concept of a pod. So when everybody works in a pod, if the whole pod wins, right, they do well, they all get a bonus. You say, well, I did my job, I should get a bonus, and not. Well, it doesn't work like that. So we're all kind of our brother's keeper, so to speak, and that's really where teams are. But look at now we have the portal where college players. There was this last season they had I think it was like Georgia or someone on the team. My buddies was telling me that they had 16 players who had made the championship, but they're not on the team anymore because they were always signed up with the portal. They're going to other teams. Well, how is that possible? You've worked so hard together, and you've accomplished something great, and this is like your career, your college career, right? Why won't you finish it off? But no, because they're getting paid, they're going other places. So we really made money and excess our focus, not camaraderie, community, and these kind of things that are really intangible.
Right. So those are definitely the soft skills, right? What do you think about like this idea of like that hustle culture, right? Like, where it's like, oh no, you got to do. But then there's like this completely different spectrum where it's like radical empathy, and both of them, those are the mains that are being pitched right now in terms of like anything on social media and the trends and whatnot. And they're definitely they're like mutually exclusive. Nobody is doing both, right? But these are specific trends that are continuously.
Well, so let me ask this. So when you say hustle culture, can you describe that?
Hustle, like have 6, income streams, and it's like exclusively just hustling, where it's like no work. Forget your feelings. Forget what everybody is doing. Forget being conscientious of anybody else. You just have to work and make it and be successful. Versus then you have, oh no, don't say that because that might hurt their feelings, and their feelings are valid, and they are, but then it's only that, right? And so there's no room for hustle culture and radical empathy. I mean, is this something that, kind of like you're seeing, or is this something that you can kind of like rectify between the way that you're teaching, or what?
Well, I mean, we're not really teachers. We're operators, right? So we set these in the job descriptions and the scopes of work and stuff. What I would go back to is intellectual curiosity, right? So in order to be happy and to feel accomplishment and success, you need to satisfy your intellectual curiosity, right? So for example, like let's say a producer is like, oh man, I love this. I'm going to do it, even if I don't get paid, right? But then he becomes really good at it, and someone's like, I'll pay you to do this, right? Now he might have other jobs, or he might have to work a day job as a bank teller to do this at the side until he becomes really good. But that's fine. When someone doesn't love what they do, right? So there's an old saying: if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
Right.
If you don't love what you do, you can hustle. Now, there's people, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money doing what they love, what they do, and they're really good at it. And my trade craft is the stuff that I do. So I look at psychology, I look at religion, I love all this stuff, but it makes me more effective. So there's no way you could do everything. And that's why, again, when you choose the things that like, let's say I like to be a sailor, I like to do certain things, that's all I can do. And maybe you can monetize it, maybe you don't, right? And, I'll give you a good example. Steve Jobs, when he was going through school, his parents couldn't afford it, so he said, I'm going to drop out. But his last class was a calligraphy class, right? I'm sure you heard the story. So he took calligraphy, and I think he just had intellectual curiosity about it. But that helped him learn about the font type, which actually distinguished the Mac from PCs early on, right? So this kind of goes to show you that hustling for the sake of making money, driving Uber, doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't.
First of all, like, what do you do with that money? And and there's a thing called opportunity cost. What are you giving up? Is it sleep? Is it those relationships? Right? What are you giving up? And at the end of the day, any amount of money can be lost. I've heard amazing stories in my years, and I'll share one with you. A buddy of mine 2 years ago was telling a story about this guy. He just sold his company for $100 million. He was he just finished his $10 million house. He was living in Arizona. He was playing golf with him. It was like a Wednesday, and he was coming back to Chicago, and he had kind of a cough, right? So he comes back, and then like a week later, like the following Monday or Tuesday, his wife calls and goes, "Hey, this guy's got like stage 4 like throat cancer, right?" And he says, wow. He's like, yeah, they think there's nothing they can do. He's got 6 months to live. So, he's going through his treatments or whatnot. By October, he comes back, he sees the guy. Now he's from when he saw him in May playing golf, he's now in his wheelchair, drooling on himself. And a few weeks later, he passed away, right? Here you go. He made $100 million, right? I just heard the story last week. Woman comes in, she's 37 years old. She's with her daughter. She's buying a Porsche, and the guy says, what's going on? He goes, well, I have stage 4 breast cancer. I'm going to be passing away, so I want to have a luxury car before I die. I'm buying this car, but I want my daughter to pick up the car because when I'm gone, she'll be able to have this, right? So this goes to show you, what are you hustling for?
Yeah.
Would she rather give up the Porsche and have 10 more years with her daughter? I don't know. But that's what you have to ask yourself. What's the opportunity cost?
Right.
And this hustle culture, this idea to make money. So let me go back to leverage, right? When you build these relationships, and this is what we've done over 25 years, I can pick up the phone and I can have people come to Florida, not at cost, because they say, "Dee, you've made me money. I believe in you. I will show up for you."
Right.
That is real power.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And that's what you want. When you call your mom and say, "Mom, I got this problem. Let me show up." You're not giving her money. She's showing up for you.
Right.
So when bad things happen, you need that community. You need that family. You need that fraternity.
Right.
So if you don't have those people and you have all this money,
Right.
And there's always someone who'll be taking your money, but are they going to do a good job? Are they going to really show up for you? So when you do that hustle culture, you got to ask yourself, now this radical empathy, this is nonsense, because when you don't really, when you're not honest with people, like you said, like, "Hey, I love you, you're a great person. However, I don't like what you're doing, so therefore I'm not going to allow you in my orbit anymore because it's just not working." Until you do the work and maybe, it's working for you, great. God bless, go. But it doesn't work for me. And you have to be able to terminate people.
Right. Yeah.
You just have to.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And I think that is something that is highly missing. People just are raised a certain way and they believe that they just have to kind of take it and, let's just be nice and, let's just not address it. Because again, like you said, it's harder to say no or address certain issues and to have the difficult conversations that are actually pretty meaningful, and actually make us all happy because there's clarity, right? So let's also talk about now, because in the beginning we talked about archetypes, and I want to be clear on that because I think that sometimes people can misconstrue them with stereotypes. Can you differentiate between the two? And I'd love for you to explain, because I know that there was some, reading that, that you sent, and, lots of really great statistics, but also talking about how, yes, we have the feminine archetypes and the masculine archetypes, but as humans, we need to have literally all to be better leaders and to have a better society. I mean, I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's psychological, there's drivers, analyticals, all that stuff, and I think part of the human condition requires us to really explore all these parts of ourselves, right? So, for example, let's say a father who can, engage his daughter on, braiding her hair or helping her go buy a doll or, doing all that stuff. That's fine, right? Because that's where she's the most comfortable. Trying to make her into a tomboy isn't the best. Like, say, "Hey, I want you to ride dirt bikes with me because that's how we can spend time together." Simultaneously, if that girl says, "Hey, Dad, I want to ride dirt bikes," that's fine too. So I think, I think what we try to do is, first of all, let's be clear, humans are very complex, right? And we all have, different, tendencies and things that make us are who we are. The most important thing is you shouldn't try to put yourself into a box, right? And I think all I'm saying is that there are certain things that like we go back to like, let's say, intrinsically, and there's some great statistics and studies where, a professor gets rated by their students at the end of the semester, but then someone can look at that video of 30 seconds that teacher, and they go through the same survey and they're about 80%, the same, right? So people, even if they want to be polite, they can say, okay, this is someone who I like. Maybe I'm attracted to in a physical way, or I like that this person's a kind of take charge guy, or this person, right? Whatever the reasons are. So if you're not accentuating those, if you're always like, well, I can't do this, but I like everything that's pleasurable, what's going to happen when something bad happens, right? So I think part of the thing is that, and a lot of women don't do this anymore because it's funny. It's like, well, I don't cook because they don't want to be cast as like, I'm not your mother, I'm not going to cook a meal. But what a nurturing way to like show affection to say, hey, I'm going to take my time and cook you a meal, right? Mm-hmm. That's like, no one does that.
Right.
So that allows you, as if you're on Tinder, you could stand out and be like, wow, this is pretty interesting, right? Or going through something, but like a book or going to a play or whatever. So what happens a lot of times is that, because you're just going by what the mob is doing, like, oh, let's go to Tinder, go out to dinner, we split the check. So now it's like, well, okay, I go out with this guy, maybe it's just like, some kind of physical relationship. But, if something happens, well, I'm not really that kind of person. You can't really call on me. I'm not gonna be able to help you move or whatever. And I think intrinsically, and, we can talk about, and Scott Galloway will talk about this, but people want people they can rely on. And it doesn't matter if it could be, even friends, like, as a guy, you want friends you can go to that are giving you good advice. You want women that'll give you the same. And there's also, the final piece on that is that I think archetypes, evolve because, what happened in the 40s and 50s, women stay at home and raise the kids. I do believe that, going back to the Austrian study, both parents play a role and they need to be raising the kids, right? Simultaneously, though, it doesn't mean that if a woman's working, it's bad. It's also that, why are we creating these 9-to-5 jobs anymore? Why do we have to do that? I mean, when people leave at 5 o'clock, do they still check their emails? Yes. That's why Denmark and France now make it illegal to have you send emails after a certain time, right? So one of the things that we have to do is, recast, what these roles are. And it's great for, when you're in a family unit, right? You'll say mother, father, everyone needs to help. Kids can set the table. And now this might sound idyllic, but this is what makes for good families, right? Because if one person gets trapped doing all the work, how's that fair?
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like the creating value, like in different countries, if a guest comes over, everybody's cleaning. It's not just one person that's cleaning because they feel ownership of that home because it's theirs. They're taking care of it, I definitely think that culturally there are different, but it's not just also culturally. I think that it's upbringing. And definitely there is this aura of this digital society that is even in those spaces now causing this loneliness, and so, just to kind of, maybe kind of come full circle with this, where you're talking about formation and fraternity. And what was the last one? Family, of course. How can one avoid, this loneliness? I mean, is this, obviously there's a direct correlation, is that if you're valuing these things, in our society right now, for somebody who is feeling lonely that maybe wants to, involve themselves and to also explore this concept of, hey, you know what? Maybe this is not working for me. What would you suggest?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things, right? Like, I mean, people don't allow themselves to ever get bored or they always have to be plugged in doing something, right? So, let's say you had a friend and the friend said, hey, I'd love to get together for a drink, but, I've been traveling, I got to really, clean my house and, my maid can't come or whatever, right? Say, hey, you know what? Let me come over. I'll bring, a bottle of wine or I'll bring some food and let me help you, right? That one action, like, wow, that was really interesting. Now that person, if, they might want to reciprocate, but that's how you develop this other relationship. Or like, hey, you know what? If you're going to grocery, I'll go with you and I can, instead of just getting, stuff delivered, right? So, that's why when you play sports or you're in the military or you have these shared experiences that are a little bit more taxing, you develop these greater relationships, right? Everyone loves to go to a great party, go out to dinner, take a picture of food, go on vacation. Those are the things that are accentuated once you have these deep relationships. That isn't the relationship, right? That's a kind of like a panacea. It's,
Right.
it's not real, right?
Right, right.
But like I always say, what does Tuesday afternoon look like? Hey, I'd love to get together, but okay, you know what? Maybe I can give you a hand on that, right?
Right.
So being a friend to as many people as you can, right? And that's the same thing. There's people that say, "Oh, I'm so busy, I can't." So eventually, if they can't reciprocate, then you have to decide what that is. It a one-sided relationship, right? But the first step is yes, try to make yourself available. Say, hey, you know what? I haven't seen my mom in a long time. Maybe I'll go instead of just calling her or texting her. Let me go make some time. So really, it's about you taking time out of your schedule to be a friend or be a family member and provide that fraternity, right? And today, everything's so easy. One of my good buddies, he owns the Mojo coffee shops, and he was saying in New Zealand after the financial crisis of 2008, they say that there's things that we do fast, there's things that we do slow. You pay your bills online, this and that. But when it comes to coffee, they elevate the coffee and the food, and there's no internet there. So you're going there to have a cup of coffee, having something nice to snack on, but you're enjoying conversation. So one of the audits you can do, your self-inventory, is how many people have I helped? How many conversations have I had in person? What efforts have I made to extend myself? Really, that's it. So if you can't say you've done any of those things,
yeah, not good.
I mean, before you point the finger at other people, oh, they're not. Are you showing up for other people?
Yeah.
And that's hard because it takes energy. So again, if you're drugged out or drunk and you're just rolling around, yeah, you can't do those things, right? Because you're not capable. But when you're showing up, and listen, it's hard. I mean, I have a lot of places I have to show up for. I have to jump on planes and things. It's not easy, but it's meaningful. One of my current projects, I didn't want to go to Florida a year ago, and certain things didn't work out well for the client. Now I'm there, and I've been there, for almost 6 months, knocking things down. But every time I talk to the principal, like, hey, when you're there, things are different, right? So when we're at our best as people, and you're at your best, and everyone is in with their family and their friends, it changes. Not just a Zoom call, not just a text, but being there, helping, lending a hand, giving a story, right? Say, hey, I got you. And you don't, like if you don't like the way someone said something, just say, hey, listen, that was a little hurtful, and maybe they can recalibrate. However, radical empathy, and I say, no, yeah, you were a bitch, or hey, that's not cool. But there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because again, if you go back to catechesis in the religious, God calls you out, right? He's like, hey, this is what this looks like, right? So I think we've gotten away from that. We got into this like pseudo psychology where everybody has to be, soft clouds and bright. It doesn't work like that. There's no rainbows and unicorns and stuff. Life is hard. Life isn't fair. But again, if we steel ourselves and we build that emotional regulation at an early age, life is really great in a lot of ways. But there's going to be rough days. And when like I go back to my cab driver, I say, you know what? And I told you, hey, listen, I always say buddy. I say, hey, buddy, right? Maybe I said it too fast, but I try to clear up the conversation. Now, you might be angry, whatever. But then I see the guy's got a pillow on the armrest because he's been driving so much. So you look at who you're dealing with and you consider their situation. You realize, like, you know what? I'm not going to badger this guy because my life's 100% different, right? Maybe not better, but different.
Right.
And that's what you have to consider. And that takes empathy, right? So you can't just, because you can, I'm going to call your supervisor, I'm going to blast you. You know what? This guy's got a rougher life. And you know what? That person needs to take the time to say, you know what? And I have a lot of characters that are really grateful. They're happy people. They go out and they, right? And we have and they pick me up multiple times. So they tell me their stories. They remember all this stuff. So it doesn't matter what your job is, but it depends how you receive it. There's a great movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And it talks about this guy who's in a concentration camp with his son, but he's telling his son that this is all like a movie. It's just like and even though it's like rough, but it was his, I think it won an Academy Award. It was probably like 20 years ago. But he was really just kind of like, using this enthusiasm and this point of view to protect his son so he wouldn't feel stressed or anxious because of what was happening, right? So that's kind of how life could be. Like, you don't have to be unrealistic with the condition, but you can also look for the good in everything as much as you can,
right,
and try to keep moving yourself with the positive people. And like I said, if you set the boundaries and you say, listen, I won't accept this behavior. Like if you show up at my dinner party and you're blasted and you're drunk, you're not coming back.
Right. Well, so it sounds like a lot of it is mindset. I mean, like just to your example, like Man's Search for Meaning, where the concentration camps and how certain individuals that were there survived because of the mindset that was there, and others not so much, And I think that mindset certainly is important. what is the cost of not changing your mindset as it goes right now? What is the cost of it 10 years down the line? Where will we be if we are not fixing this situation?
Well, let me say it this way, is that, so a lot of people try to obfuscate things. So I'm Catholic, so I'm going to give you that POV, right? So we talk about formation, and at the root of formation is either philosophy, morality, or God, right? Whatever religion whatever flavor you want, but it's God, right? So the people that have a very strong faith, they can endure a lot of things because that's part of what we're taught, right? And simultaneously, you know that this isn't your end game, right? So you're kind of doing the best you can. You're helping people as you go, and that's what that looks like. I think when people give up, and that's what you're seeing, a lot of people are upset. But let me give you this as a kind of a converse point, is that, at least for the Catholic faith, in the last, from 23 to 25, in almost every diocese, and then you go to Des Moines, Iowa, I went to school out there, there's an 84% increase of people converting to the Catholic faith this year in 25. In Sweden, in England, a 0.5, which is they're completely Protestant, and right. So you're seeing people now finding faith and moving into religions, what I call religion of preservation, where you're not like injuring or hurting other people, but you're like you're accepting them. Doesn't mean you give them a pass or give them, but you say, you know what? I love you. I'm here. Come meet me, but I'm not gonna say it's okay to do these bad things. Like if you're robbing people, that's not a good thing. No. I don't want to be involved, right? So I think that to your point, mindset comes from formation. Formation comes from the philosophy, the operating systems that you subscribe to, right? So if you have no operating system, you're to your point, there's a digital device that's dead. So that OS, look what happens to our iPhones. They're constantly updated. So how are you updating your OS? Yeah, right? That's true. What are you feeding on? Who are you? And that's why fraternity comes in. Who's your orbit? Who's influencing you, right? Is it the YouTube influencer? Is it things you're seeing on Instagram? Or is it people that you're really interacting with? And the abrasion of life is kind of a blessing, right? Because through pain, things become clearer because you're like, oh God, this really sucks. Right. Well, how did I get here? Well, this is how I got here. I blew all my money buying a Porsche and I can't pay my rent, right? I have to live. So that's why humility, managing yourself in a way that you should be great on your own. And, you talk about labels in. People that are always like trying to show off their labels, that's not important because the people that actually have that kind of money, they don't care. They're driving Honda Accord because they could buy 10 whatever you want, right? So once you understand gratitude and humility and fortitude, because sometimes you have to go through rough patches, right? And not complain. That's the thing. Complaining is easy. Like, you know what? This will pass. And you kind of hunker through. Guess what? It gets better. But I think we go, oh my God, my life's so bad. This happened. Listen, I live by Shirley Ryan, right? And you go for a run and you see a person with no feet or in a wheelchair or that's, quadriplegic. That's a bad day. And even those people, they have like a great outlook. Right. So you really have to really understand like how blessed you are and live in that gratitude. And I'm not want to, talk about gratitude journals and all that stuff, but it's not that hard to be grateful. Right. We live in a great country. We have our politics, we have our bad issues, we have to fix it, but that's a reflection of us. We caused this, right? We caused this division because we're not, right? And to your point, when we looked at the Me Too movement, a lot of stuff came out where there were bad actors that were men that were taking advantage of women. And women knew about it, men knew, nobody said anything. Why? Because they were enjoying excess.
That's a lot, but it's true. So, so where are we headed though?
Well, like I said, you're seeing a lot of people has now run out of these digital experiences. They're starting to feel empty. So that's okay. What else is there? Yeah. What else is there? What was there in the beginning? These religions, right? And then they can pick whatever flavor they want, and there's different denominations. But that's where community comes in. And really, even your top astrophysicists are like, there is a God out there, right? So if you connect with the Creator and you start to really, listen, and there's different dogmas and different religions, whatever you want to choose, that's a starting point. You can decide, right? But what happens is where we're headed is we get back to community, right? Most people, when they sit together with their friends and stuff, think about when you're in high school and you didn't have any money, you had a great times, right? Now you have all this money, you go out and you're like, that place sucked, or this person came late, whatever. So why are we so angry? And we had nothing before, and now we're all, right?
So you're saying that we're headed back then? Good. I mean, no matter wherever we are at, where there are a lot of issues within the society, still, to some degree, people are going to recognize that void and we're headed back to a better society, you think?
I think there's work to be done, right? I think we are, and I think what's going to happen is that you're seeing people respect, and I think like so. Let's just take the effeminate male. I think there's a respect for women, and and women being essential and everything that they are. There's a strength there that we don't have as men, right? But we have another strength that women don't have, right? So there's a respect that we should have, and we didn't have that in the 40s and the 50s. It's kind of like, well, you're the woman, you stay home, and I'm going to do this stuff. It's kind of this whole this my girlfriend has a great saying called the furnace of affliction. This furnace of affliction has taught us, will people fall and have issues? Sure, but part of the thing is when you have good formation, right? So it's kind of like this. It's like there's a great movie called Unbreakable, right? Or this guy. When you have solid formation, no matter what you can kill me, but I'm not going to break, right? So those Navy SEAL type of wills are formed by having good formation.
Right.
So the more we find those people, and then every one of us can help add to that. Like, have you thought about it this way? Have you tried this? Now those orbits become richer, and then more people say, well, and an orbit is like gravity. So I say, hey, I really like hanging out with Aaliyah. She has all these great things, and maybe you only get one thing this year, and then you get two things next year. But eventually you start to lose those other people that are not helpful, and now your orbit starts to change. So I do think we're headed in a positive direction where a lot of people are getting away from like pseudopsychology, kind of coming back to humanistic trends. And it's like, look, you got to be a friend. And look, we already know if you're lonely, right, it'll take anywhere from 10 to 15 years off your life. Yeah. So those people, if they don't change something, they're probably not going to be around much longer. But the ones that are, probably will, and will flourish.
Oh, that's good. Well, it's hopeful. At least I'm hearing that this is a good direction that we're headed in.
Well, I think it is. I mean, even things like Tinder and all these things, they've been out there, but they're losing their appeal because people are they're kind of tired of it, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think that's a good way to look at it too, because I think that a lot of people come in from the aspect of everything is doomed. We're doomed. This is just degenerating really fast. But I think that you're right, that people are recognizing that there is a void. They are lonely. They want to do something about it. They're recognizing that things that are out there are also not working. But also there's a lot of confusion because society is also shifting very fast in terms of like all of these advents that we're having, which do affect us socially and the way that we interact with each other.
But, but if you look at things in context, right, look back to from the 30s to the 50s, right? So that whole time between, let's say, 36, 37 to 45 of World War II, you saw dramatic shifts. So, for example, sliced bread was kind of invented, right? So we started eating sandwiches. People used to eat like proper meals. Yeah. So our whole culture's changed, within a short decade, and that's okay. But what happens is that when you're able to have intergenerational conversations with your grandparents, with elders or whatever, right? You're able to pass these thoughts on. And look, I smoke cigars. We have a lot of young guys in their 20s that come in and they'll sit down, have a cigar. I go, man, I love what we're talking about, and they make time, and they'll come from all over Rockford or Burr Ridge just to come and have a seat and have a cigar. So I do think there's hope. There's absolutely. I just think that we focus on all this stuff and we lather ourselves with this doom, but it really isn't this difficult, right? It's really about, again, it's like, formation, fraternity. And the simplest way to say this is that if someone is having all these anxieties and these issues, well, what do you believe in? I don't believe in anything. Well, then here, why don't you read a few books, figure out what appeals to you. Let's start there.
Right. Spirituality in any sense, I would say, is developing your moral fabric and helping people feels good. So, and being introspective. Any last thoughts, takeaways, you'd want from this conversation in terms of anybody that might be listening, or, how can we be better? I mean, any last thoughts?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who are being better, right? I think anytime you take 5 minutes out of your day or half an hour to go have a cup of coffee with someone is great. I think there's a guy named Keith Ferreira wrote a book, maybe 10 years ago called Never Eat Alone. I'd start there, right? And there's a thing called Kai Po, and the thing's from like Indonesia. I'm not sure exactly where, but they'll go days without eating until they can share the meal with someone else, right? So one of the things that you should always try to do, let's say you have 7 days a week, one day you should try to find someone to share a meal. So if you order a sandwich, find someone to share with. It could be the cleaning lady, it could be whatever. And I've done these things, right? and you'll find these amazing sellers. It doesn't matter what their job is, but they'll tell you these things that'll enrich you, right? And all you're doing is giving them your time, right? And I think the more you can, make time for other people to spend, a few minutes, it could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, you'll start to see it. And then the more you do it, the more you will do it. And then these digital things will start to lose their appeal. Right. I mean, you'll still watch movies, but it's not like you need to know what's going on Instagram,
right? No,
because you're a part of it.
You're right, and that's why they say that all of these blue zones where people live,
right? That's
living
a great point.
Past 100 years old, is because they're actually in these communities where they're eating together and they're seeing each other and they're active and they're outside and they're and yeah, maybe they're on watching a movie every now and then or whatever, but that is not the central focus.
We have this great, this great cigar lounge in the Gold Coast called Biggs. And, there's guys that are there and there's a regular group and they'll say, hey, how was your meeting? And, people that you don't expect, or they're your friends, but they still remember, they say, hey, I know you're traveling. So it feels great because you feel like you have this family, right? And that's why we talk about formation, because you have to be able to be a good friend, a part of a family, to be there. Then the fraternity. And then eventually you get to this family where these people will show up for you, right? And that's really the important thing, because if you go through this human journey and you don't have those connections, you're really not wealthy. No. This hustle culture, having all this money, it can and will be taken from you, because when you need something, no one's going to show up for you.
Absolutely. You could be very lonely in that respect. So there you have it. Be with people. Right? What else? Be with people, be introspective, be a better version of yourself.
Intellectual curiosity, be curious about the world, about other people, and try to contribute where you can.
Right. I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
How can we be in touch? What if somebody might want to hire your services? How can we get a hold of you?
They can reach out to you directly, and then we can
reach out to me directly. I'm the conduit then.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks again. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.